Hi, welcome to not newly listed, more of an update with the Canadian Securities Exchange. I'm your host, Barrington Miller, Director of Issuer Engagement, and today I'm here with Dr. Lyle Oberg, CEO of MYND Life Sciences. That is MYND, M-Y-N-D, trading on the CSE. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Barrington. It's great to be here.
Let's start off because, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a newly listed clip. You have been listed with the CSE, but this is more of an update. But for those who are just joining us and who may not know, what does MYND Life Sciences do?
MYND Life Sciences is currently doing research into many of the psychedelics, but psilocybin in particular. We have identified what is the so-called trigger gene that turns off inflammation. And what we found is that psilocybin in particular is a very strong anti-inflammatory and actually shuts off that gene. So what that means literally is that inflammatory diseases, by elevating this particular gene level, which psilocybin does, it actually turns off the inflammatory process. Inflammatory processes are good. You know, when you cut your hand and you see redness around it and things like that, that's good. That's the inflammatory process working to heal. Where inflammatory processes are bad is when they don't shut off, is when they continue on. And this is where you get autoimmune diseases, where the body, in essence, attacks itself. And for contextually in 2021, probably the best example of what is called a cytokine storm, which is a really bad inflammatory state, is COVID-19. So COVID-19 doesn't kill you because there's too many viruses in the body. What happens is COVID-19 actually turns on the body to such a degree that the inflammatory response, your own body, kills your organs and ends up killing you. And obviously that's in the worst case scenario, but literally that's what happens. And what our research is showing is that we can actually shut that inflammatory process off. And in response to your question, yes, it does come back on, but we can shut it off at times when it's extremely high. And I'll take it one step further, if I may. Psilocybin has for a long time been known to be hallucinogenic, right? So that's a very important trait of psilocybin because it shows that it gets into the brain. Like not a lot of drugs get into the brain. There's a thing called the blood-brain barrier, which basically keeps a lot of stuff out from the brain. But we know that psilocybin is getting in. So if you pair that with the current thinking that depression is a neuroinflammatory disease, and if for those of you who want to do research, if you take a look at neuroinflammation and depression, that's basically the prevailing theory about what happens with depression. Well, what we've seen is that psilocybin, through its anti-inflammatory properties, can actually stop that depression. And if you think about it, it's really consistent with what has been shown anecdotally, where people take a large dose of psilocybin and they get better for 3 or 4 months.
Right.
Okay, well, that isn't going to say, that isn't going to stop 5 years of bad memories and things like that. It's, one dose simply isn't going to do that. So it's very consistent with all that. And that's what we've discovered. And then we went one step further. And that one step further is we actually are developing, and we're kind of 75% of the way there, of developing a biomarker that actually measures this. It actually measures the level of that gene. So what we have the ability to do is actually predict when depression is going to get better and when depression is going to get worse and when you have depression. So that's a very, very powerful tool because up till now, its depression diagnosis is made simply by symptomatology and not by the objective test.
Well, doctor, this is this is truly fascinating. I just don't do these updates for our audience. I'm a little bit selfish and I'm doing it for me too. So those are two massive areas that your company is undergoing research and providing just better quality of life in the future. Now, again, for people that are listening, we aren't necessarily endorsing at the CSE,
Mhm.
but we are learning, and this is what one of our companies are doing, and it is cool as heck. Um, so I guess there is a lot of talk and a lot of buzziness around psychedelics and psilocybin, and I guess I want to know what your differentiator is, and how people can see through the haze and the fog of all these companies that are out there. And I mean, there's so many different tiers and levels
Yeah.
and areas because it's such a wide topic. But um, I mean, you're in research and development. Um, what's your differentiator?
Well, I guess first of all, what I want to say is that a lot of research into psychedelics is being done, not necessarily in universities, or not necessarily in universities that are top tier universities. Our research is being done at UBC, and for Canadians, obviously that's the University of British Columbia. We're working out of the Michael Smith Laboratory. Michael Smith was a Nobel Prize laureate, and our lead researcher was the first person that he hired. So he's been working out of that laboratory for 30 years. So this is not a fly-by-night type of research. This is very solid, progressive research where we go from A to B to C to D. And that's critically important because if you want to get a drug approved by the FDA, which will bring it mainstream, you have to do that. You can't simply put forward anecdotal cases and unless they're, the FDA can do it if they're truly exceptional and truly overwhelming. But the rarity of that is quite astounding. So what we're doing is following through. We've discovered how the drugs work, which you're going to need to go to the FDA. The other side of it is the legality of it. And what we have for studying psilocybin is we have 38 Section J exemptions to study psilocybin and its analogs. And contextually, there's probably 45 to 50 of these in Canada, and we have 38 of them. So we can look at psilocybin, we can look at psilocin, we can look at 36 of the other analogs and decide which one is best. Who's to say, for example, that psilocybin is the best, the chemical formulation of psilocybin is the best one? And what we're looking at are all 38. So we have our models set up. We have the ability to look at various diseases. And that may sound like a little bit trivial, but to try and set up a model about Alzheimer's disease, to try and set up a model about depression. And when I say a model, I'm talking about animal models. To try and do that is actually takes a lot. To get a mouse with Alzheimer's disease or an animal with Alzheimer's disease takes a couple of years.
Right.
And our research has been going on. Our researchers have been looking at this gene for 10 years. This is not something that we just decided, oh, this sounds good, let's do it. The neuroinflammatory part has come on in the last 2 or 3 years, but we've actually have models that show that, and this is going to sound, very researchy, scientific-y, so my apologies, but we have it so that a depressed mouse gets better. And the answer is, to your next question is, yes, you can tell a mouse is depressed because they stop eating, they stop going through mazes, all of these things. And they're humanized mice, so they tend to extrapolate through to the humans in the majority of time. We're looking at a lot of different models. One of the things that our research team did as well, which was back in September, is they actually had an article published in the Lancet. And Barrington, you may or may not know, but the Lancet's probably the #1 medical journal in the world. So
No, I didn't know. How do you spell that?
Lancet.
Lancet. Take a look if you're listening and watching.
Yeah, it's a Dr. Wilfred Jeffries is our chief researcher. And their article is quite amazing because in the models that we have, they have actually shown that Alzheimer's disease can regress. And that's not hold still, that's not slow down, that's get better. And what you saw was in the animal models that the animals actually started remembering things again. And that's truly astounding. Albeit it wasn't with psilocybin, it was with an older anti-cancer drug, but psilocybin has the same properties. So that's why we're studying it. We have patents, and that's why we're looking at that with relation to Alzheimer's. When we do this, Barrington, we don't simply go in and say, well, let's try it. There's a lot of scientific work and data and research before we attempt this. And what we've seen is pretty amazing.
Well, that is a massive differentiator. No, it's incredible,
Yeah.
and like I said, we truly hope that this carries forward. Uh, Quality of life is paramount. Now I know you're not by yourself at Mind Life Sciences. Again, ticker symbol MYND. Uh, can you give a shout out to a couple members of your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Wilf Jeffries is our chief researcher, and Wilf is truly an amazing man. He has over 60 patents. He's been published over 100 times. He's truly one of these guys who is a energetic researcher. Another lady that has come on with us is a lady by the name of Dr. Irina Saranovich. And she is a PhD MD. And that's a very rare combination, but she is leading our clinical trials and designing our clinical trials. So between those two people right there, and myself, by the way, I've got to put in a plug for myself too, Barrington.
Oh, absolutely. Last but not least, either for new investors and for current investors, what do they have to look forward to with Mind Life Sciences in the near and mid future?
Sure. One of the issues with any research and development company is I mentioned the A to B to C to D, and there is a regimented, formula that you have to go through, and that takes some time. So typically with an R&D company, you're looking at revenue being down the road. There's two things I want to comment on that. First of all, research has changed. And one of the important elements of it that has changed it is actually artificial intelligence, AI. Because what AI has done is taken a algorithms that used to take 1 million different molecules and bring it down to 3 or 4. It would take years and years for scientists to do that. Well, now we're talking, days and weeks in order to do that with artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence has changed the research and development scene considerably, especially as it applies to new drugs and new medications. So we're using AI to a significant degree, and it will speed up dramatically what we're doing. Excuse me. The second point that I wanted to mention is the biomarker. So we think, and our biomarker will be ready to be commercialized in Q2 of this coming year. And we think that this is going to be huge from several points of view. First of all, when it comes to research and development, to give people an objective marker of what their product is actually doing is huge. Whether it's from, IV ketamine, whether it's from, visual booths, whether it's from anything that has been out there to see that depression and neurologic illnesses are getting better, to have an objective marker obviously is huge. So that's one side of it. But we also think that there's an element of overall inflammation in the body. And we think that this marker may well have an ability to track your particular inflammatory processes in the body. And we think that we'll be able to show when you're having when inflammation is rising, when inflammation is decreasing, which may actually be able to tell you whether or not some of these medications, these natural health products that you're taking are actually working.
On behalf of the CSE, we appreciate you, Dr. Lyle, for taking the time to explain exactly what Mind Life Sciences does and the direction that it's heading in and where it was coming from. Um, Please continue to stay healthy and safe. For those of you who enjoy this interview and who are listening and watching, you can find out more on www.thecse.com. Also, check out the usual social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And with that, we are concluding our interview with Dr. Lyle Oberg, CEO of MYND Life Sciences, symbol MYND, trading on the CSE. Thank you. Have a happy holidays and stay safe.
Thank you for tuning in to another newly listed on the CSE. Please feel free to hit like and share this content and hit subscribe if you haven't already.